Or there. Okay, there we go. No, I don't like that either. Hi, guys. Thank you so much for joining us again in our campaign to talk about the 60 days to stability, the last 60 days in any kind of leadership transition. Today, we have Abby Rosenswaike, who is Director of HR here for us internally with Carrie, but also is an HR team member. And has definitely seen her fair share of leadership transitions. And so today we have HR on the line to talk about how you responsibly do this or what you do with if you're kind of left with new staff. So Abby, why don't you say hi?
Hi.
Yes, hello. Thank you for having me, Christine. Happy to be here. I actually started out my career as a teacher and then moved into talent and HR at growing nonprofits, and have worked with nonprofit leaders on all things people. And transitions is definitely one of those that comes up a lot, as we know. And yeah, the way I approach the work is, I'm someone who believes that organizations are really just networks of relationships. When you understand that, you see that leadership transitions are fundamentally about managing trust and connection, and that a lot of the chaos that happens is preventable. So we'll dig into that.
I do like that. This is preventable. It is avoidable. Most of the time, like you can get to 90% and still like 10% can be the, I don't know, creative gray space to cause a little chaos, but 90% of it can be avoidable. And I love that. So thank you so much for the intro. Well, let's get right into it because we got a lot of stuff to cover here today. And I created these kind of questions because I want, I'm pretty sure that anybody going through a leadership transition, it's like a visceral experience, right? You're either going to leave or somebody has just told you that someone is leaving. And so I want to ask this question, the first 48 hours. When a senior leader announces they're leaving, a lot of organizations default to legal and operations, the agreements, communications, who picks up the work. But as an HR leader, what do you actually do in the first 48 hours? And what happens when HR isn't brought in at the start and it's kind of left to unwind?
Right. Yeah. So the very first thing I do is figure out, what kind of exit this actually is, because that shapes everything. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work of Anjanette Gunter, the founder of Just Bridges. Justbridges.org is her organization, but she has a really great framework that describes the kind of situation as having different dimensions. So like, how planned was it? How aligned is everyone? So an unplanned exit, emergency knowledge, audit, what lives only in this person's head, get it out before they're gone. Managing if it's board directed or like contentious type of exit, making sure that, HR is in the room, so someone else isn't already shaping the story. And then a planned exit, which we see, of course, all the time, still needs a 48-hour protocol. So the announcement itself, is a vulnerable moment. People worry about their own role and whether there's actually a successor. You're not managing a crisis, but the window, matters just as much. So first move, get to the staff before the grapevine does, whether it's planned or unplanned. The moment the departure is announced, you've got to get in there. And so you want to be able to share. You won't be able to, share everything, all the context, obviously. No personal circumstances or performance details, depending on the nature of the exit. But you can say, here's what we know. Here's who's leading right now. We have a plan. People are resistant and uncomfortable with change, and for, good reason a lot of the time. So, I've seen what happens when this planning isn't in place. I worked with a school where the principal wasn't being invited back. The organization offered severance, a graceful departure, and she hadn't declined or accepted yet. And then one morning, instead of supervising arrival, she gathered the staff to announce it was her last day and, claimed she was being terminated, and the teachers were in tears and the kids had been supervised. It was total chaos, you can imagine. And then it took months, to rebuild the trust. So, the first 48 hours aren't about managing information as much as they're about managing the experience of uncertainty, for every person in the org.
Well, and I think that's a great lead in to write like the change management piece of this,
Right.
because I think a lot of the times we think that we're hiding it better than we are, even if it's like you're planning on leaving. The organization also can be able to, show their cards and be a little too
Mhm.
transparent. So, how do you make sure that you do control the narrative enough that you're not causing more chaos, right? That you don't have a mass exodus if it's like a well-known leader leaving, or in this age of like quiet quitting or rage quitting, whatever the
Right.
words are now, that it's important that HR be there to help shape the narrative.
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. And so let's talk about the 60-day window. And the 60-day window, and this is what this campaign is talking about, because it's about stabilization. 48 hours, the decision's already been made. You're in triage. This is like the fire is already on fire. So the 60 days is about the planning of this piece. And so from an HR lens, like what are the non-negotiables that you have to have happen in that window, where like
Sure.
the mistakes that you've seen have happened when organizations miss this like critical window, either if you're getting ready to terminate somebody or move somebody on,
Mhm.
or you have a leadership change that is saying like, hey guys, this is it.
Yeah. Yeah. So the 60-day window only works if there's already a succession structure in place, right? So if you're building from
Bait and
scratch,
switch.
yeah, if you're building from scratch the moment someone leaves, you're already behind. It's oh, well, you're behind. And so, orgs that do this well have a deputy, who knows operations, knows the culture, is ready to step in. That can't get built in 60 days. So the 60-day window is ideally, for execution, not building the bench. So there's the three-phase framework to break down the 60 days. So the first phase one, the first 20 days, getting aligned fast, having a written transition plan in place, the knowledge download, assignments made, board having full visibility, communication strategy developed, the same day staff meeting as you talked about, external messaging ready, knowledge transfer sessions begin, that sort of thing. Phase two, days 21 to 40 is operations focused, informing external partners, funders, vendors, the board, managing board relationships, building the org calendar, things like grant deadlines, compliance filings, those sorts of things, everything visible. And, this is super important to you create the who's who's, the centralized reference. Who
Yep.
does what? Contact info, processes, that sort of thing. And then for phase three, the wrap up, the last 20 days, really finalizing transition deliverables. So having the interim or the successor fully set up, having decision-making authority, having systems access, the full context, making sure all those deliverables are handed over, knowledge notes, calendars, things like that. And I think it's really nice to be able to have a formal departure event, honor the legacy of the outgoing executive.
Okay.
Yeah, and it also provides a visible signal of continuity, to all the stakeholders. So that's really important.
So throw a party is what
Yeah,
I heard.
exactly. Exactly. We all love a party. Come on.
No, I think that's super helpful, because I also, one of the things that, when we meet organizations that are also getting ready to kind of do this, one of the questions is like, what should I do first if I am going to let go of my CFO, or I'm thinking of leaving? One of the, like, it's simple enough to be like, well, are you a signatory on your bank? Like, can you actually sign? Because there are times when a CEO has, been in and out, and the same tenure that the CFO has been there longer. And it comes down to really basic paperwork. And internally, we call this like, where are the keys? So, like, we have a
Yeah.
whole kickoff meeting being like, can you just tell me where the files are? Because half the time,
Right.
that's like part of like a new job anyway. So, it can go to such banal, like everyday stuff to throw a party at the end. Mark a sign of like
Yeah.
the departure piece, so everybody gets a little closure. And I think that
Yeah.
sometimes is something we miss in an organization.
Yeah, that's important because you have to think big picture and details, right? Like you're saying, like it's both, and both are
Yeah.
equally important. So,
Sounds exhausting to leave a job.
yeah.
And so my final question here is that, okay, like we know that the person is leaving and we're going to set up for the new leader and we want to make sure they succeed. What does HR have to have ready culturally, structurally, from a people data standpoint.
Mhm.
And what does that signal as a new leader coming into an organization if you're seeing it and if you're not seeing it?
Right, right. Yeah. So, yeah, once I joined it, org, as their CPO was departing, and she'd been there since the beginning. I came in 30 days before her last day and walked into a fully laid out transition file, like systems access, the
Oh,
calendar, action steps, the who's who, all of it, and it made such a difference.
sure.
So I've really seen it in action, and HR needs to have on day one ready the cultural intelligence. So actual culture versus the stated culture is really important to impart on the new leader. And, what are the undocumented norms or communication styles, informal power, things like that. And what do people need from the leader right now? Also, sort of like the structural clarity. So an org chart that reflects decision making, not just titles, a board relationship map, key documents, budget, strategic goals, obviously, compliance obligations. Um, the other thing is turnover risk. So having like that
Oh, yeah.
in part like people data.
Yeah.
Yeah. So um, key person dependencies, whose departure would be most destabilizing, like having
Uh-huh.
that knowledge. And then stakeholder intros. So obviously like the finance team, the board members, community, if relevant. And it's important to not leave that new leader to figure out the relationship map alone. I do find though that some people kind of come in with that in mind already. A lot of times, like one tool I've found really impactful is the empathy interview. So the new leader coming in, conducting 15-minute one-on-ones with every single staff member. And
The
of course, it
listening
depends on the
tour.
size of the org, but like it's
Sure.
doable, right?
Yeah.
Within those first 60 days. And then making sure it's, both professional and personal. So what brought you here? How do your goals connect to the mission, to our mission? What do you do for fun? Making sure that that connection starts to be set at the beginning. And that definitely helps people feel more at ease in the transition. And the way it's approached, I think it can be an approach, especially if it's coming from a genuine, authentic place where people don't feel like, ooh, are they trying to assess like if I belong here or not? Like, is this, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think, there's no org chart can really do that. It can't give the leader a real cultural intelligence.
A vibe check, as
Yeah,
they
vibe
say.
check,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah,
So
of
that's
course.
that's so important. Yeah.
I love that. Well, I think be on the lookout for Abby's article because she has given some good answers about like, hey, make sure you have X, Y, and Z. She has said it here in this podcast, so you can listen to it 100 times if you want to.
Yeah,
But
as
the
I'm sure
other
you will.
thing, naturally, the other way to do it is to read it. So be on the lookout for our article and catch our white paper here at the end too. That's going to give you a checklist about what you're going to do in these last 60 days so that way you can be better prepared. But thanks, Abby.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Christy.
Of course.
All right. Bye-bye.
All right, let me stop. There. That wasn't bad at all. That was
Okay.
awesome.
All right, good.
Super
Hopefully
easy.
that's what you're looking for.
Yeah, that is.
Okay,
I
perfect.
hope that other people are looking for it too, right?
Yeah,
Like
I
that's the
know. I
bigger
mean,
point.
I mean, it's not even like, oh, some orgs go, every org goes through
Every
this.
work.
So it's like,
Every org, and like I think it's amazing. I wonder how many people have ever experienced a transition like what you just said, where you were like, I walked in and that
yeah,
person's
and it's
mad.
rare. Yeah, right.
I couldn't imagine, and of course it's like a people person, but like on top of it, I couldn't
Right, right,
imagine.
right.
Like Charlie's about to start here. I'm like, oh shit, should I have like things like
It's
this?
hard. And I think it also matters to like the context of the size of the org, how quickly they're growing, and like
Yeah.
we were talking about before, like sometimes, you're building the plane while you're flying it. You're flying the plane while you're building it. That's the expression. So it's
Mhm.
like what's realistic too, you have to also think about, but
I hear you. I think just that in of itself is like, even how you open it, like this is avoidable. Not like this doesn't all have to
yeah,
be on fire. And I
yeah,
think that's the part that people, when I was talking to, I'm not sure you've met Seth, but he's a COO here with us too. And he's going to be on the same campaign. But Seth was saying something similar. He was like, look, if you're going to leave a year out and if you're in
yeah,
operations or like you should be putting into like some places that make your exit a lot easier. And
yeah,
I think too few of us actually do that.
yeah. Yeah, especially
So
like even if you're not ready to share that you're leaving with anyone, you can start putting that plan together, you know?
like, oh, we wasn't talking about retiring for the last 10 years. Like,
Yeah.
you're not hiding it as well as you think you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
anyway, but that was awesome.
All right.
Thanks, Abby.
All right. Thanks, Christy.
Bye.
Bye.